There is an inconvenient, dark, and sinister truth about the migrant crisis that I don't see anybody in the West discussing honestly. Whether it's the United States, Britain, or the rest of Europe, there is a glaring and obvious root cause of which, if it is not addressed, will leave these countries destined to perpetually deal with migrants showing up in boats on their borders. In this video, we're going to discuss what this root cause issue is. And unfortunately, I'm sure it's going to ruffle a lot of feathers. But if you're interested in actually solving the problem, then this information is key. Thank you so much for choosing to watch this video today. If you don't know me, my name is TJ. I'm Nigerian and British mixed. And on this channel, we talk about African geopolitics. So getting to the root cause of problems is imperative if you want to solve that problem, because any other action that does not deal with the root cause will only provide superficial and short-term solutions. In the case of the migrant crisis, where Africans and people from other global south countries arrive illegally at the shores of developed countries, there is actually some alignment that I want to point out before I get into the real details of this situation. The alignment is that, on the whole, Africa and the global south do not want to send their youth, their prime young men, into Europe for better opportunities. They would much rather their youth stay in the continent of Africa or in their global south countries and help develop those countries, giving those countries the best chance for a better future. And similarly, we are seeing a reaction of the people, for example, in Britain, who say no more. They do not want to accept foreigners coming into their country with different cultures and different practices, changing the makeup of Britain and its societal norms. So if there is an alignment on these two issues, then at least that's a good starting place for us to find a solution. Now, I've been hearing a lot about how there is an invasion of foreigners, for example, in the UK. And there are many issues that go along with this. I've done videos on Tommy Robinson. I've done videos talking about the Islamic extremism and all of the controversial topics around that. As a mixed person that is British and African, I think I'm in quite a good position to have a dual perspective to understand both sides of the story. From an African perspective, an individual might feel like they have no more options. They have nothing left to lose. They live in a poverty-stricken, crime-infested place where there is no opportunities for them to rise and become self-actualized as prosperous adults. Once a person gets to that type of mentality, they begin to care much less about how others may perceive their actions as being righteous, positive, negative, or evil. They will be functioning in survival mode. Survival mode is much less compassionate, and it will allow somebody to take actions that very well may not be appreciated, like arriving and requesting asylum in a foreign country. So we must then ask the question, what are the conditions that create that survival mode in that origin country of this young asylum seeker? The truth is, the conditions can often be linked back to the West, to the developed world. In the case of Africa, in the 1800s, there was something called the Berlin Convention, where the leaders of Europe decided that they now owned Africa, and they would divide Africa up into 54 countries. You could call this an invasion. It is a situation where Europeans entered the continent of Africa and stripped these countries back, taking away a lot of their culture and, in fact, ruling over them with no qualms. In some cases, these takeovers were extremely brutal, and they were interlaced with a slave trade that I think everybody here can recognize was a terrible and nasty thing. Although slavery did exist on the continent of Africa before the Europeans came, the Europeans industrialized it to a level that Africa had never seen before. Now, I'm not here to say that Africa was the land of pure and righteous people only, but it is a fact that the country was owned and divided up by white Europeans. In my lineage, on my father's side, we are from a tribe called the Yoruba, And the Yoruba are known in the country of Nigeria. But actually, the Yoruba tribe has been divided because of colonialism. You can find Yoruba in Sierra Leone, Gambia, Benin, Togo, Ivory Coast, and Nigeria, through no fault of our own, because of a meeting held arbitrarily in Berlin. Our tribe was divided amongst 6, 7 countries. In regards to Benin, Togo, and Ivory Coast, anyone from my tribe will now be educated in French, and anyone in the other countries would now be educated in English, the national language of these countries being French or English, respectively. For those in Europe, imagine a foreign entity coming in and stripping you of the language that you speak, dividing your nation into nations without your consent, your control, or your say-so, and then proceeding for the next 130 years, extracting resources, providing you with only the very little minimum of the profits gained from those extractions. In the case of the French-speaking countries in Africa, of which there are 14, they still use a currency that is completely controlled by the French. This currency, by design, is a debt-based system that extracts some $500 billion in wealth out of those countries directly into the French coffers. So the picture I'm trying to paint here is that colonialism and neocolonialism, the continued practice of exploitation that is present right now in the continent of Africa, are what creates the conditions for people to be hopeless, for people not to be able to feel like there's a future for them in their country, and force them to take a treacherous journey to a place like France, Italy, UK, America, to seek a better opportunity.
It's interesting, we ask, what's wrong with your country? Well, we don't even start by saying the King of Belgium created a slave colony for 30 years. The government of Belgium ran the slave colony for another 40 years. The CIA assassinated your first popular leader, Mr. Lumumba, and then installed another dictatorship for the next 30 years. And then Glencore and others now suck out your cobalt without giving you tax income. We don't reflect on that. We say, what's wrong with you? Why don't you govern properly?
In regards to the Europeans taking umbrage with Africans and global South people coming into their countries, you must remember that the Berlin Conference was a system of ownership. They told Africa that they owned us. Their colonies were now citizens or pseudo-citizens of the countries that would control them. Belgium, France, Spain, Portugal, Britain. And by the way, anytime anyone tried to rise up against these things, there would often be violence, direct or covert operations to remove any such people. These could be politicians, these could be chiefs or kings. Now, you might say that colonization ended when all of these countries became independent. But what you may not realize is that although they returned sovereignty back to these fake countries that never existed prior to the Berlin Conference, after tribes had been scattered and divided into different regions, like my tribe, corporate interests persisted and remained under the control of the Europeans and the Americans, even though they had given up the control of the governments. What happened then was that many puppet leaders were put into place. Leaders that would form dictatorships and allow extraction of the world's most valued resources, keeping the Europeans rich and wealthy, and in some cases, selling those resources as refined goods back to the continent of Africa. It is a system that systematically and by design oppresses the continent of Africa. It is a system that imposes banking, the IMF, the World Bank, that keeps African countries indebted to this day. It is a system that has provided weapons, pitching one group against another, so that there will be perpetual destabilization throughout the continent, with the real cost being paid in the blood of African men, women, and children. It is my particular area to talk about Africa, but this also happened in the Middle East, in Asia, in South America. It's ironic that the British that love their tea do not produce it in their own country. bananas, coffee, and a myriad of resources and agriculture that enriches the West, that even enters the culture of the West, that now does not produce a reciprocated wealth transfer back to the places where these things are produced. You see, if the West and Europe and America had decided to allow Africa to prosper in its own way, maybe by now the African continent would be a place that has the same level of infrastructure as Europe, has the same level of technology, internet, electricity, job and employment, and business environment, allowing the people who are there to want to stay there and keep developing. It is time for the West to truly acknowledge this, because until it is acknowledged and changed, we are going to have a globe of have and have nots, and the have nots will stop at nothing once they get desperate enough. Playing a global zero-sum game is a losing game, because eventually the zeros will eat those that have some. Now, I want to make something clear at this point. I don't think it's the white individual in Europe that thinks about this. They didn't come up with the colonial plan. They don't necessarily play an active role in the continued neo-colonial practices that their governments do. So it is for them to say, hey, we have this problem. The cause is the government practices, our foreign policies, the things that we do in the global south. If we can fix this, then those people won't come here. Instead, what I'm seeing is the anger directed directly at the immigrants, the people that arrive. And I understand this to some extent. It's a very easy target. But this would be a superficial and a non-efficient way of handling the problem. The problem is systemic. The problem is global. The problem is interconnectivity between the global south and the West. Right now, it's manifesting in far-right ideologies, ethno-nationalism. But I know that there is a group of people that do not have ill will directly because of someone's skin color or their ethnic origin. They just don't want to see their country invaded, taken over, and changed fundamentally because of migrants arriving illegally. Every country should have the right to protect its borders, and manage its immigration. But I would ask those of you that are angry with the migrants to give a thought to the systematic colonization that happened to Africa and how it has affected and continues to affect us. It may have been something that was done over 130 years ago, but the effects still persist. The governance still persists. It may not be overt governance, but it is control and manipulation via banking, via business, via war, and via all sorts of even more complicated mechanisms that I talk about all the time on my channel. Maybe there are those out there that think I'm wrong about this, that I have a victim mentality. And I'm sure there's many people that think that way. For sure, Africa has plenty to do itself, and Africa must bear some responsibility because we've had our share of corrupt leaders, people that act and sell out the continent for the sake of outside interests. I'm willing to put my hand up and acknowledge that. Is the West willing to put their hand up and acknowledge their continued neo-colonial practices in the global south and in the continent of Africa? Once you realize that the pact for the continuation of colonization is a real document that 14 African countries had to sign with France, once you realize that United States, according to the book Covert Regime Change by Lindsay O'Rourke, which outlines 64 times the United States have practiced regime change operations. These are the mechanisms by which Africa is not able to produce stable societies, and it is time for that to change. It will become a win-win if we do this. It is imperative to understand that it is in the best interest of Europe to allow other places in the global south to prosper. The world doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. Like I said before, I don't blame the everyday man on the continent of Europe. I don't begrudge them their frustrations and anger. The problems that they're facing are real, but the governments and the people in power maintain a system that produces the outcome that they hate. I'm sure many of you out there have comments and ideas and thoughts about this. I'm bracing myself for probably some backlash that is likely to come. But if you're out there and you have nothing to say, would it be too much for me to ask you to write the words "end neo-colonialism" in the comments section. It just lets me know that you watched the video to the end, you like the channel, you like what I'm doing, and you want me to continue. Thank you so much for watching this video today, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.